How does a man get told he was never family by the brother he sat beside at their father's deathbed? Mine did it at the graveside, before the dirt was even level, in front of every aunt and cousin we have. I am the son who slept in the hospital chair for 4 months, who learned which side Dad liked his pillow on, and my brother Russell handed me my coat and told me to leave the house before the family sat down to eat. I did not raise my voice. I did not beg. I just drove to a motel and waited, because Dad had told me one thing in his last clear week, with his hand on my wrist, that if Russell ever stood up and read me out of this family, I was to call the old man named Whitfield and say only, "He did it," and that Whitfield would bring the tape. I called him from the motel parking lot. I will tell you whose voice was on it at the end. My name is Eli Marsh. I am 39 years old, and for most of the last year I was the only person in my family who could have told you the smell of the room my father died in. Not the funeral home, the actual room. The rented bed, the machine that hummed, the chair I slept in until my back learned its shape. Everything that happened at the grave hangs off that chair. A man does not forget a chair he slept in for 4 months. He carries it the way he carries a name. I had a brother. I still have him, technically. Russell is 4 years older, and from the day we were boys, he believed the oldest son was a rank, like sergeant, with a uniform you could put on when you needed people to step back. He lived 3 states away with a wife named Claire, whose family had money and manners, and he had built a life around looking like a man other men listened to. When Dad got sick, Russell sent flowers, the way some men send checks, to mark that he existed without having to be in the room. The flowers came twice. I was there the whole time. I knew the night nurse's children's names. I knew which side Dad liked his pillow on, the right, always the right, and that if you raised the bed too fast it hurt his back. None of that is a complaint. I am only laying the floor down so you can stand on it. Our father was Walter Marsh. Everyone in Hartley called him Walt. He had lived on Cedar Street 30 years, a low brick house with a deep front porch, and on that porch sat a wicker rocker that was his and only his. Every clear afternoon of his last spring, I wheeled him out there myself. I lined the chair up facing the street, facing the maple he planted the year I was born, and I sat on the step beside him. We did not always talk. Sometimes we just sat. 2 men on a porch, one in a wheelchair, one on a step, watching a street that never did anything. On one of those afternoons, a good one, his voice clear, he said a thing I did not weigh at the time. We were just sitting. He said it the way he said most important things, sideways, looking at the street and not at me. He told me I showed up, that I always had. Russell called, he said, called and told him all the things he was going to do, but I was the one who brought the cup, cracked the window, sat there on the step. I had come every day that whole year, he said, and he had counted. "Don't," I said. "You'll have me crying on the step." He told me he was only saying what he had seen with his own eyes. He patted the arm of the rocker, twice, the way he did. He had seen it, son. I was here. And I was never to let anybody stand up and tell me I wasn't here. Don't let anybody stand up and tell you you weren't here. I thought it was an old man being sentimental in the afternoon light. I know now he was telling me, as gently as he could, exactly what was coming and who would say it, naming it ahead of time so that when it came I would have his voice to set against it. He had already started building the thing in Whitfield's box. He was letting me hear a corner of it on the porch first. By the door of that porch there was a hook, a plain iron hook, and on it hung my father's keys, house key, the old shed key, a brass key to a lock that had not existed in 15 years, all on a leather fob carried so long it had gone soft as cloth. Those keys hung there for 30 years. You walked in past them. You walked out past them. So ordinary nobody in the family could have told you they were there. I am telling you they were there, because they matter later more than the house does. In his last clear week, and I use that phrase on purpose because the weeks were not all clear toward the end, and I will not take you into the ones that weren't, my father reached over from the bed and put his hand on my wrist. Thin hands by then, but the grip was his old grip, sudden and certain. He said my name first. Then he said something I did not understand and would not understand for a long time. At the time, it sounded like a tired old man rambling. If Russell ever stood up and read me out of this family, and he would, he said, I was to call the old man, call Whitfield, say 2 words to him and nothing else, the 2 words that meant he did it. Whitfield would know. Whitfield would bring the tape. What tape, Dad? I said. Who's Whitfield? Your old friend Whitfield. What does Russell have to do with any tape? I would know when I needed to, he said, and his eyes were already closing. That was all I had to carry. 2 words, a name. I was not to lose them. I don't understand. I would, he said. I was to promise I'd call him, promise him. I promise, I said, because you promise a man anything in that bed. He had said the thing he meant to say, and spent what he had to say it, and his hand slid off my wrist. I wrote the 2 words on the back of a parking receipt that night so I would not lose them. You do not push a man in that bed for a footnote. I folded the receipt into my wallet and told myself he was confused. He was not confused. That is the part I have to live with. He saw the whole thing coming, weeks out, clear-eyed, and he set something down in my hands like a man leaving a tool on a workbench for a son he knows will need it. I just did not know what it was. My father died on a Tuesday morning, with me in the chair and a paperback open on my chest. I will not describe it. He went the way he wanted to go, quiet, with somebody there, and the somebody was me. I called the funeral home. I called Russell. He answered on the second ring like a man who had been waiting by the phone, which I found out later he had, though not for the reason a son waits. I told him Dad was gone. I told him it had been peaceful and that I had been there, and I heard him exhale on the other end of the line in a way that I read at the time as grief. I know now it was not grief. It was a man hearing that a clock had finally started.
Okay, he said. Okay, I'm glad it was quick. Listen to me, Eli. You've done enough. You hear me? You've done enough. I'll handle everything from here.
There's a lot to do, I said. I can do the funeral home. I already know the...
No, he said, and it came out faster than a grieving man's no. You've been carrying this for months. You're exhausted. You're not thinking straight. Let your big brother do something for once. I'll drive in tonight. I'll handle the home, the announcements, the cars, all of it. You go home and sleep. A pause. One thing, did Dad ever, when you were with him, all those nights, did he ever give you anything? Papers, an envelope, anything he wanted kept? Did he say anything about his arrangements?
He mostly slept, I said. We didn't talk business, Russell. He was dying, which was true. I did not even think of the 2 words in my wallet, or the name, or the tape. They did not feel like business. They felt like a private thing between a father and the son who sat with him.
Right, of course. I just don't want anything getting lost in the shuffle. His voice eased back into warmth, so smoothly I did not catch the seam. Get some sleep. We'll do this right.
I thought that was kindness. That is the kind of fool a grieving man can be. A brother who had been 3 states away for 4 months was telling me to rest, and I heard a man finally stepping up. I said thank you. I actually said thank you to him.
Don't thank me, he said. We're family. That's what this is for.
We're family. He said it the morning our father died, and the opposite over the open grave 4 days later. And the only thing that changed in between was that he had gotten his hands on the paperwork. I drove home and slept 14 hours and let Russell handle everything. And everything turned out to mean the home, the announcements, the cars, the seating, and the will. Especially the will. I did not think about it at all. I had a father to bury. Russell had been thinking about the will, I would learn, since before there was a body. The day we buried Walt Marsh was bright and cold. The whole family came, aunts, an uncle, cousins by the dozen, people I see at funerals and weddings and nowhere in between. Aunt Marlene in her good coat, Uncle Ray, My cousin Dana near the back with her hands in her pockets. Claire stood beside Russell in dark glasses, the picture of a family burying its patriarch. I stood where a son stands. I had helped pick the casket. I had written half of what the minister read, the half that was true. I thought, God help me, that I belonged there more than anyone. The service was short. The minister said his piece. They lowered the box. People threw their handful of dirt, that little drum sound it makes, which I have never gotten used to. And then, before the men with shovels had started, before the dirt was level, Russell stepped forward to speak. People expected him to. The oldest son, the rank. He squared his shoulders the way that made a crowd go quiet, and the crowd went quiet. And Aunt Marlene moved up beside him and put a hand on his shoulder the way you do for a man about to grieve in public. He did not grieve. He cleared his throat and looked at me across the open grave of our father.
"Before we go back to the house," he said, "I think we owe it to Dad to be honest with each other about what family means, about who's really been part of this family, and who's just been hanging around the edges of it, waiting."
Waiting. He let the words sit out in the cold, and I still did not understand he meant me. I genuinely did not. I looked at him, waiting for the eulogy. The crowd waited. And then he turned his face full toward me, with our father's grave between us, and he said it.
"Ellie was never really one of us. Not the way that counts. I know that's hard to hear with everybody standing here, but I've watched it for years. He latched onto Dad these last months, and we all saw it, and I'm not going to stand at my father's grave and pretend it was love. He hung around an old sick man waiting for a cut. That's the truth, and somebody in this family has to be man enough to say it."
I have replayed the next 30 seconds more times than I can count, and I still cannot tell you what my face did. The sound stopped. Nobody jumped in to defend me. The part that took me the longest to forgive. Longer than I have forgiven Russell. There was a beat where it could have gone another way. Uncle Ray shifted his weight and opened his mouth, and for half a second I thought my father's brother was going to say the true thing any of them could have said. He looked at me. He looked at Russell. And then Aunt Marlene's hand on Russell's shoulder tightened instead of coming off.
"Now's not the time, Ray," she said, low, the way you hush a child in church. "Let's not do this here. Russell's grieving."
Russell's grieving. As if I were not. As if the man being put in the ground belonged to Russell's grief and not mine. That one sentence from Marlene did more than Russell's whole speech. It sorted the crowd, and it told every cousin standing there which side of the grave the family was on. It was not my side. And then a thing happened that was smaller than any of it and stayed with me longer. Somewhere in the half-circle, not loud, not meant to carry, but carrying anyway the way a thing said at a graveside carries, one of the younger cousins leaned to the woman beside her and said it. He does have the look, you know, like he's already pricing the place. A little laugh after it, the kind you let out at a funeral when you have decided the sad part is over and the gossip part has started. I heard it. Russell heard it. He was 4 feet away and his ear turned a half-inch toward it, the way an ear does. And he did nothing. He did not say she's wrong, leave him be. He let it stand, because it was doing his work for him, and in that 1 second I stopped being the brother who'd sat with our father and became, to the whole back of the half-circle, the man with the look, the man already pricing the place. That is how fast it goes. One cousin's joke, one brother letting it stand, and a room redecides who you are over an open grave. I found one voice. I made myself say it, plain, no heat, because I thought facts would land where feeling could not. I slept in the chair, I said. 4 months. Ask the nurses. Ask anybody who came. I looked at Marlene. You came once. October, 20 minutes. I was there every night after.
"And we're all very impressed you kept a tally," Russell said, not even raising his voice, the cruelest sound in him. "That's the whole problem, Eli. Who counts the nights? Who keeps the receipts? A son who loved his father, or a man building a case so he can stand here and tell us what he's owed.
I'm not telling you I'm owed anything, I said. I'm telling you I was there. That's all. I was there and you weren't.
I was raising a family and running a business, so this family had something to inherit, he said. And he said it to the crowd, not to me. We can't all sit in a chair holding a cup. Some of us have to build something.
Nobody's saying you didn't visit, Eli, Marlene put in, soft, and she would not meet my eyes. Nobody's saying that.
That was the trick of it. Nobody was saying I didn't visit. They were just not saying I was the one who stayed, and in the silence between those two things, my brother rebuilt the whole last year of our father's life with himself at the center. Nobody said it isn't true, Russell. Nobody said Eli slept in that chair 4 months while you sent flowers from 3 states away. The whole family stood at the grave of the man I had buried with my own hands and let him call me a stranger come for the silver. And the worst of it was that for a few seconds I almost believed him too. Standing there, I went looking inside myself for the greed he'd named, the way you pat your own pocket when a man says you took his watch. I did nothing. I did not shout. I did not say the word chair. I stood there and held still because some part of me, the worst and oldest, the little brother part, still believed that if I held still my big brother would stop. He did not stop. He walked around the grave to me, around our father because it mattered where the body was. And he was holding my coat. He had picked it up off the folding chairs. He held it out, folded over his arm, like a maitre d'.
I think it's best you head on now, Eli, he said, quiet, just for the front row and me. The family's going back to the house to eat. I'd rather you not be there. Don't make this a scene. Take your coat.
I looked at the coat. I looked at him. And I said the only thing I had left to say, which was the simplest thing, the thing that should have ended it. It's Dad's house, I said. I have a key to Dad's house, Russell. I've had it 15 years. Something moved behind his eyes when I said the word key. I thought it was anger. I know now it was the look of a man whose plan had just touched the one detail he had already handled. He almost smiled. He didn't, because Claire was watching and the cousins were watching. But it was right there, the almost smile of a man holding a card he knows you have not seen.
It's the family's house now, he said, and the family would like a quiet afternoon to grieve our father. Go on, Eli. Please, don't make me ask you again in front of everyone.
Don't make me ask you again in front of everyone. He turned his own cruelty into my embarrassment. If I refused, I would be the one making a scene at a grave. He had built it, so the only way to keep my dignity was to surrender it. He handed me my coat at our father's grave and told me to leave before the family ate. I have asked myself this every night since. Would you have driven off, or stayed and made a scene? I took the coat. Uncle Ray walked me part way to the cars. He was the only one. My father's own brother, hands in his pockets, not looking at me, telling me low that he was sorry, that it wasn't right, what Russell did. I told him he could go back and say so. They were all still standing there. He said it wasn't his place to get in the middle of us boys. He patted my shoulder twice and said to give it time, that Russell would come around. It's not my place. That was the whole family in one sentence. Everybody was sorry, and nobody's place, and so the only person whose place it was to throw me out got to do it unopposed. I turned and walked back to my car across grass that was somebody else's grass now, past cousins who found things to look at on their phones. Dana caught up to me at the car. My cousin Dana, who had said nothing at the grave, who had looked at the grass. She came across the lot half running in her funeral shoes, and she put her hand on my arm. And for 1 second I thought, here it is. Here is the one person.
Ellie, wait, she said. Are you? God, I'm sorry, that was awful. The whole thing was awful.
Then say so, I said. In there, to them. You didn't have to defend me, Dana. You just had to not look away.
I know. She wouldn't look at me even then, and that told me everything. It's just. Russell's been saying things for a while, and Marlene, and I don't know what's true anymore. He says you had Dad sign things at the hospital when he wasn't all there. He says there's a whole side to this you're not telling.
I had Dad sign things. So that was the story. That was the thing they had built in the phone calls I was not on. Not that I was greedy, that I was a forger, that I had stood over a dying man with a pen. I never had Dad sign anything, I said. I held a cup so he could drink. I read to him. That's the whole crime, Dana. Ask the nurses.
I want to believe you, she said, and she meant it, which was almost worse. I do, but you'd say that either way, wouldn't you? That's the thing. You'd say exactly that either way.
Why now, Dana? I said. Ask yourself that. Dad's been sick a year. If Russell cared so much about whose family, why wait until the man's in the ground to call a meeting? Why the rush? What's he in such a hurry to settle?
I don't know, she said, and something flickered across her face, like a question she had not let herself ask. He has been. He keeps calling everybody, all hours, about the paperwork, about who signs what. Marlene says he just wants order. It is a lot of calls, though. For order. She stopped herself.
It is a lot of calls, though. She heard it as she said it. I watched her hear it. And then she pushed it back down, the way you do when believing it would cost you the family you still have. And there it was. The trap was airtight, because the truth and the lie came out of my mouth in the same words. I had no paper, no proof. I had 4 months of nights nobody had watched but a dead man and a rotating crew of nurses. And against that, Russell had a story with a forger in it. And a story always beats a feeling. Dana squeezed my arm and let it go.
I have to get back in, she said. I'm sorry, Eli. I really am. And she went back in, to the house, to the eating I was not allowed at. I watched her go.
I got in and I drove. Not to a bar. I did not call anyone. I drove to the Hartley Inn out on the county road, a motel with a flickering vacancy sign and a coffee maker bolted to the dresser, and I paid cash and sat on the end of the bed in my funeral clothes. And here is the thing I did not do. I had 2 words and a phone number, and my father had handed me exactly this moment and told me what to do in it. Call Whitfield. Say he did it. And I sat on that motel bed and did not call. I had carried those 2 words 4 months, through the chair, the funeral, the grave, without using them. Would you have called Whitfield that first night? Or waited like I did? I waited. The truth is, I was afraid that if I called and nothing happened, the thing my father left me would turn out to be nothing, and I would have to live in a world where his last clear act was confusion, and my brother was right about me. So I did not call. Not that night. I lay back with my shoes on and waited for morning. I did not sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I drove back across town. I do not fully know why. I think I wanted to stand somewhere that was mine. I parked under the maple on Cedar Street and sat looking at the dark house. And I did a small thing. A thing I had done 10,000 times. I walked up with the spare key. That key had lived on my own ring for 15 years. I had let myself in to check on Dad at all hours. The key knew that lock the way my hand knew the key. The key did not fit. I pushed my father's house key into my father's front door, and the lock would not take it. The shape was wrong inside. I tried it twice, 3 times. Gentle and then not gentle. The way you do when your hand refuses to believe what it already knows. Somewhere between the grave and now, while I sat in a motel, my brother had had the locks changed. The front door lock on the house our father lived in for 30 years had been replaced before the man was a full day in the ground. I stepped back, and that was when I saw the hook, the iron hook in the door frame, where my father's keys had hung on their soft leather fob for 30 years. It was empty, bare iron, a little brighter where the leather had rubbed it smooth. And the wicker rocker, his rocker, the one I had wheeled him out to face the street every clear afternoon of his last spring. Somebody had dragged it back against the wall and turned it around, so it faced the brick instead of the street. An empty hook and a chair turned to the wall. I stood on the porch I had pushed his wheelchair out onto 100 times, locked out of his house, and I understood, finally, that my brother had not lost his temper at the grave. He had planned this. The eulogy, the coat, the locks, the chair. It was an eviction, and it had been an eviction for weeks. I did not bang on the door. I did not wake the neighbors. I stood there until the cold got into my coat, and then I noticed, on the porch boards by the rocker, a cardboard box set out neat in the dark. My name was on the side in Russell's blocky hand. Eli. He had gone through the house I had practically lived in for 4 months and gathered up the things that were mine, a charger, a sweater, the paperback off the couch, my reading glasses, and set them out like something for the trash collector. That same night, he had not even waited a day to put me out on the step. I carried the box to my car. That is all I did. I did not break the new window, though I thought about it with a clarity I am not proud of. I set it in my trunk, next to the one thing of my father's I had taken from the hospital, his old gray cardigan, which I had not been able to make myself wash. And I drove back to the motel, and this time, with an empty hook burning behind my eyes, I took out my wallet and the receipt with 2 words on the back of it, and I dialed the number my father had made me carry for 4 months. It rang twice. An old man's voice answered, awake at 3 in the morning, as if he had been awake at 3 in the morning for years, expecting exactly this call.
"This is Whitfield."
I could not get a full sentence out. I said the 2 words my father gave me. "Mr. Whitfield," I said. "It's Eli, Walt's son." My voice did something I did not give it permission to do. I steadied it. "He did it." There was a silence on the line. Not a confused silence. Not a who is this silence. It was the silence of a man setting down a cup of coffee and reaching for something he had kept ready for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The way a doctor's voice changes when the test result is the one he expected.
"He read you out at the grave," Whitfield said. "It was not a question."
"In front of everybody," I said. "He changed the locks on the house, too. My key doesn't fit. He put my things in a box on the porch."
"Of course he did," Whitfield said, and there was something old and tired, and not at all surprised in it. "All right, son. Listen to me now, because your father made me promise I'd say this part exactly. He told me you'd call, and he told me what it'd mean if you did. You did right to wait until you were sure, and you did right to call now."
"He said you'd bring a tape," I said. "He kept saying a tape. Mr. Whitfield, what is on—"
"Don't ask me that on a phone," he said gently, but it shut the door all the same. "Some things your father wanted said in a room, with the right people in it, in his own voice and not mine second-hand at 3 in the morning. I'm not going to spoil what he built. You'll hear it the way he meant it heard."
"Built," I said. "You make it sound like he planned this."
"He sat in my office a year ago and planned every piece of it," Whitfield said. "He knew his older boy. He knew exactly what Russell would do the second he was gone. He was not guessing, Eli. He was watching the whole last year, and he made arrangements."
"How long have you had it?" I said. "The tape. How long?"
"Long enough that I've half hoped this call would never come," he said. "He swore me to it. I couldn't act, couldn't say a word, not to you, not to anybody. Not until Russell did the thing your father said he'd do. Tonight he did it, so now I can."
"Then why didn't Dad just tell me?" I said. "Why 2 words? Why a stranger's number in my wallet for 4 months?"
"Because if you'd known, you'd have braced for it," Whitfield said. "He wanted you to be exactly who you were, the son who showed up because he loved his father, not the son waiting for a fight. Russell needed to do it in front of everyone, on his own, with nobody warned. He has now." A pause. "I have everything your father left with me. The will, The real one, signed, notarized, witnessed by people who'll stand up and say so. A letter. And the tape. And I'll tell you one thing tonight so you can close your eyes. Not one person in your family is going to be able to argue with a dead man. Not Russell, not Marlene, not whatever paper he's got people signing. He let that sit. Now, here's what I need, and I need all of it. Get some sleep. Do not talk to Russell. And whatever he puts in front of you in the next few days, and he will, and it will look official, and it will look like the easy thing to sign. Do not sign it. Do not let him bury this before I can bring it into a room.
What room? I said.
The house, he said. His house, the one with the porch. Where else would your father want it said? And one more thing so you carry it the right way. When the night comes, you do not walk in early and you do not walk in alone. You wait with me at the end of the street until every last one of them is inside and seated at that table. Russell at the head of it the way he likes. Not before. Your father was firm on that part. Everyone seated first. Then we come in. He wanted the room full when the door opened. A pause. There's a reason for the order. I'm not going to tell you tonight, but you hold the picture of it. A full table, and us coming in last.
And he hung up before I could ask him how he knew about the porch, or why the order of who sat down first should matter to a dying man. I did not ask him what was on the tape. I have wondered about that since. A man was telling me at 3 a.m. that he held the thing my father left to set the record straight, and I did not ask what it said. Maybe I was afraid. Maybe some part of me had decided that if my father recorded his own voice for this exact night, I would hear it the way he meant it heard. In a room, out loud, all at once, not whispered to me alone in a parking lot. So I said all right. I hung up, and I sat in that lot until the sky went gray. Whitfield was right inside of 9 hours. Russell put something in front of me, and it looked official, and it looked like the easy thing to sign. He called a little after noon. There is a part of you, even after everything, that picks up when your brother calls. His voice was warm now. The grave was 20 hours behind us, and he had switched costumes, from the patriarch reading me out to the patient older brother cleaning up a mess.
Hey, he said, look, yesterday got out of hand. Emotions were high. We were burying Dad, for God's sake. I said some things.
You told everyone I came for the money, I said. You handed me my coat at his grave.
And I shouldn't have done it like that. In front of everybody. I'll own that, he said, smooth, already past it. That's actually why I'm calling. I want to make this right, Eli. I do. Marlene's drawing up a little family statement. Nothing heavy. Just a one-page thing. Says we're all on the same page about how Dad's affairs get handled, who speaks for the family, keeps the lawyers out of it so the estate doesn't get eaten alive in fees. You know how Dad hated lawyers. Everybody's signing. Dana signed this morning. I'd like you to come by and sign it too, and then this is behind us and you're back in. Clean slate. What do you say?
Back in. He had locked me out at 3 that morning, and by noon he was offering to let me back in, for the price of a signature. I should have seen straight through it. The truth is, I almost said yes. Dana signed it, I said. This morning. You said Dana already signed.
Before 9 o'clock, he said. No hesitation. She gets it, Eli. She understands what's good for the family. I'd hoped you would too.
You drew up a paper about who controls Dad's estate, I said, and got people signing it the morning after the funeral. Doesn't that strike you as fast, Russell? The man's been in the ground one day.
It strikes me as responsible, he said, and the warmth thinned, the way ice gets thin over moving water. Somebody in this family has to be responsible. God knows it's never been you. Sitting in a hospital is not the same as handling an estate. Now, are you going to come sign it? Or are you going to fight your own family over a one-page form before your father's flowers are dead?
Who speaks for the family? I said. That's what it says. I read you right. Who speaks for the family?
It says somebody has to coordinate, that's all. It's a formality.
And the somebody is you.
I'm the oldest, Eli. The warmth thinned just slightly, the way ice gets thin over moving water. Somebody has to. Would you rather it was a stranger in an office charging us $400 an hour to do what family should do for free?
Dad had a will, I said. I said it carefully, watching, the way you say a name to see if a dog flinches. He must have. He was organized. He had a will somewhere. The line went quiet for exactly 1 second too long, and in that 1 second I learned more than in the whole speech at the grave. Because a man with nothing to hide says of course he had a will, here it is. My brother said something else.
There's no will, Eli. His voice was flat now, all the warmth gone out of it like a dropped call. I looked. There's nothing. Dad never got around to it. You know how he was. That's exactly why we need the statement. To keep order. So don't go making this complicated. Just come sign the paper and let's be a family again.
There's no will. I looked. He said it too fast and too sure, a man answering a question before he should have known it was coming. And I thought of Whitfield's voice in the dark. The will, the real one, signed, notarized. And I understood that either way, my brother had just told me he had gone looking for a will. You do not look for a thing you believe does not exist. I need some time, I said. I just buried my father. I'm not signing anything today.
Ellie.
Some time, Russell. And I hung up on him, which I had never once done in 39 years, and sat there with the phone warm in my hand. Not because I had won anything, but because I had just heard my brother lie about the one thing an old man across town kept notarized in a box on his desk. What I did not know yet, what Whitfield would not say over a phone, was that Russell had not changed those locks out of grief, or even spite. He changed them because of something he was hiding, something that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with why a man 3 states away suddenly needed to be the head of a house. Needed it so badly he would lie about a dead man's will to his own brother before the flowers had wilted. There was a reason Russell could not afford for me to stay in this family, and it was not the house, and it was not the money in the plain way I had assumed. It was waiting in a box of papers in an old man's study across town, and it had Russell's own name on it, and that was all I knew, and I did not yet know the half of what it would mean. The motel was the kind of place that rents by the week to men who have run out of better options. Room 11. A bed, a chair, a window that looked at the back of a gas station. I sat on the edge of the bed with my coat still on, because Russell had handed me that coat at the grave, like a man handing back something he had found and did not want, and I had not taken it off since. My phone was warm in my hand. I had already made the call. I had stood in the parking lot under the one working light and said the 2 words my father told me to say, and the old man on the other end had gone quiet for a long second and then told me to stay where I was. So I stayed. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like a state I could not name. I lay there and looked at it and did the thing the grieving do, which is run the same 4 months again from the start, because the mind keeps thinking that if you play the tape enough times it will end differently. It does not. I was back on Cedar Street. I was back on the porch. Every clear afternoon for 4 months, I had pushed my father's wheelchair out the front door and turned it to face the yard. There was a routine to it. You had to ease the front wheels over the threshold, or they caught, and he would put his hand up to steady himself on the doorframe as we went, and his fingers always found the same spot, worn smooth. Then out onto the boards, and I would set the brake, and I would bring his old wicker rocker around so it sat beside the chair, empty, because he liked it there even though he could not get into it anymore. Habit, I think. The rocker had been his seat for 30 years, and he wanted it next to him, the way you want a dog at your feet. We watched the light come down through the maple. He did not say much by then. He did not have to. I knew which way he liked to be turned, and when he was cold, and when he only wanted to sit, and I had learned all of it without being taught. The way you learn a person you are about to lose. And by the front door, on the right as you went in, there was a hook. A plain iron hook my father had screwed into the frame before I was born. His keys hung there. House key, The key to the old truck, a little brass thing for a padlock on a shed that had not had a lock on it in a decade. 30 years those keys had hung on that hook. You could find them in the dark. The night I drove back from the grave and my key would not turn, the first thing I saw through the front window, before I understood the lock was new, was the hook by the door. It was empty. I stood on the porch I had pushed his chair out onto 100 times, and I looked through the glass at the empty hook, and the rocker turned to face the wall. And that was the moment I understood what Russell had done. He had not only changed a lock, he had taken the keys off the hook. Here is what I had just driven away from. The dirt was not level yet. They were still folding the green tent the funeral home brings, the one they put over the hole so the family does not have to watch the part nobody wants to watch. My father had been in the ground for under an hour, and my brother had stood up beside it, with our Aunt Marlene's hand on his shoulder and his wife Claire a polite step behind him, and he had told 20 of our relatives that I was not really one of us, that I had hung around the old man waiting for a cut. He said it the way you read a verdict. Then he held out my coat. I did not raise my voice. I keep coming back to that because I think some part of me is still proud of it, and another part is ashamed. I could have made a scene at my own father's grave. I could have said, "Where were you, Russell, for 4 months?" I could have counted the nights out loud. I did not. I took the coat, and I walked to my car past cousins who looked at their shoes. And I drove to room 11, and I waited for an old man named Whitfield to bring a tape I had never heard. He came on the Thursday. I had pictured him bigger. My father had talked about Arthur Whitfield for 30-some years, the way men talk about the one friend who knew them before they were anybody, and in my head that friend was tall. The man who knocked on the door of room 11 was not tall. He was a careful, narrow man in his 70s in a gray coat, holding a leather case with both hands the way you hold something that is heavier than it looks. He stood in the doorway and looked at me for a moment, and whatever he saw made his jaw tighten.
"You've got his hands," he said. "Walt's hands. I'd have known you in a crowd."
I did not know what to say to that, so I stepped back and let him in. He set the case on the little table by the window and did not open it. He sat in the one chair. I sat back down on the edge of the bed. For a while, neither of us said anything, and the gas station compressor cycled on outside, and I thought, this is the man my father told me to call, and I have no idea who he is.
"Tell me how he did it," Whitfield said finally. "All of it. Don't soften it for me. I knew your father 30-some years, and I will know if you soften it."
So I told him. The graveside. The coat. The word never. I told him Russell had called me a hanger-on in front of Aunt Marlene and Uncle Ray and a dozen cousins, and that no one had said a word in my defense, not one. I told him I had driven to the house after, because some animal part of me still thought of it as the house, and my key had not turned. The lock was new, brass bright, not a scratch on it. Set into the old door my father had painted green the last spring he could still hold a brush.
"He changed the lock the same day," Whitfield said. "It was not a question."
Same day, I said. There was a box on the porch. My things. The clothes I'd left in the spare room when I was sleeping at the hospital. He'd already packed me out. Whitfield was quiet again. Then he did something I did not expect. He reached over and put his hand flat on the leather case, the way a man rests his hand on a Bible, and he left it there.
"Your father told me this would happen," he said. "Not might. Would. He said it the last time I sat with him 2 weeks before the end. He said, 'Arthur, when I'm gone, Russell is going to try to be the man of this family, and the first thing he'll do is push Eli out, because Eli is the only who knows where Russell was.' And I said, 'Walt, you don't know that.' And your father looked at me and said, 'I know my sons.'"
I had to look at the window for a moment. Here is what I had not let myself think, in the 4 months of hospital chairs, in the hour at the graveside, in the night in room 11. I had not let myself think that my father had seen all of it coming. that he had sat in his bed getting smaller every week and used some of his last clear thinking to plan for the exact morning his older son would hand his younger son a coat over a fresh grave. There is a particular grief in being protected by a dead man. It means he spent his last strength not on himself but on the wreck he knew was coming. I sat in room 11 and I felt that, and I did not have a word for it then, and I do not have one now.
He left things with me, Whitfield said. Things he wanted kept somewhere Russell couldn't reach. That's all I'll say in a motel room. I won't show you here, and I won't play you here. He tapped the case once, not because I don't trust you, because your father was very specific about where this gets opened and in front of whom, and I am going to do it exactly the way he asked or not at all. He earned that from me.
What's in it? I asked.
Patience, he said. There's a tape. He recorded it himself, in his own voice, with me sitting right there witnessing. There's a will, the real one, signed and notarized, the genuine article. And there's a letter. Those are the three things. I'm not going to tell you what's on the tape or in the will or in the letter, because your father didn't want you carrying it alone in a room like this. He wanted it heard where it would land. You'll hear it when the family hears it, all of them. The same ones who stood at that grave and watched you take your coat.
I think that was the first moment I understood that this was not going to be a quiet thing between me and Russell. My father had not built me a shield to hide behind. He had built me a room with all the doors open and every chair filled. Dad gave me 2 words and a phone number in his last clear week. I carried them 4 months without using them. Would you have called Whitfield that first night, or waited like I did? The last clear week. I have gone over it so many times it has worn smooth, like the spot on the door frame where his hand always went. There was a stretch near the end where he came back to himself for a while, the way the very sick sometimes do, and for about a week he was Dad again. He knew the day of the week. He asked about the maple. He made me describe the yard because he could not turn his head far enough to see it from the bed, and I sat there and told him about the light and the leaves like I was reading him the news. And one afternoon, with the room gone gold and quiet, he reached over and put his hand on my wrist. Not my hand, my wrist, the way you take hold of something to make sure it does not leave. And he told me about Whitfield. He said the name and the 2 words, and made me say them back twice. And then he said one more thing, and I did not understand it then. He said, "Eli, I am not giving you this because I think you cannot stand on your own. I am giving it to you because Russell is going to try to take the ground out from under you, and I will not be here to put it back." He said it plainly, no heat in it, the way you'd warn a man about a step that was rotten. And I told him Russell would never. And my father closed his eyes and almost smiled, and he said, "You have always thought better of your brother than the facts allow, and that is a good thing to be, and it is going to cost you." Then he let go of my wrist and asked me again about the maple. That was the last real conversation we had. 4 days later, the clearness went out of him for good, and 3 weeks after that, I was sitting in a folding chair while my brother handed me my coat. So when Whitfield sat in that motel chair and told me my father had said this would happen, I was not hearing it for the first time. I had heard it from my father's own mouth, with his hand on my wrist in the gold light. I had simply refused to believe a man could be that right about his own son. Let me tell you what I knew about Whitfield by the time he left room 11, because it matters for everything after. He and my father had been friends for 30-some years, since before the house on Cedar Street, since back when my father drove a delivery route and Arthur Whitfield was the young lawyer in the next office over who fixed a problem for him and refused to send a bill. The whole family knew him the way you know furniture. The old man's friend. Walt's lawyer friend. He had been at every Thanksgiving I could remember, sitting at the end of the table, and Russell and I had grown up calling him Mr. Whitfield, and never once thinking about what it meant that our father trusted exactly one man on this earth with the things he could not trust to family. It meant that when my father knew the end was coming, he did not give the tape and the will and the letter to Russell, the older son, the one who was supposed to be the man of the house. He did not give them to me either. He gave them to Arthur Whitfield, and he gave Whitfield the authority to call this family back together and stand in front of them and open that case. That was the part Russell did not know yet. Russell thought he had pushed me out of an empty house. He did not know there was a will he had never seen, sitting in a leather case in a motel parking lot with my father's signature on it and a notary's seal beside it. He thought the only paper that mattered was the one he was making people sign. Because Russell, it turned out, was busy, Dana told me. My cousin Dana, Russell's cousin too, on the Marsh side, the one he had spent the last week leaning on, the one who had stood at the grave believing every word he said about me. She called me in room 11 during those first days of waiting, and I almost did not answer, because the last time I had seen her face, it had been turned away from me at the graveside. But I answered.
Ellie, she said, I don't know if I should be calling you.
Then why are you? I said. I did not say it kindly. I want to be honest about that.
Because Russell's got everybody at the house signing something, she said. He's calling it a family statement. He had it typed up. He's going around to all of us, Aunt Marlene, Uncle Ray, the cousins, and he's putting it in front of us at the kitchen table, and he's standing there while we read it. And Eli, it's about you.
What does it say?
It says the family recognizes Russell as the head of the household, she said. It says, God, Eli. It says the family acknowledges that you were estranged from your father and were not a caretaker but a... Hold on. I wrote it down because I couldn't believe it. A quote. An individual who maintained presence during the decedent's final months for reasons of personal interest. That's you. That's what it calls 4 months in a hospital chair. Personal interest.
I did not say anything for a moment. Outside, the compressor cycled on.
He's telling everybody it's just so there's no fighting later, Dana said. So everybody's on the same page. He's saying it real reasonable. And people are signing it, Eli. Marlene signed it. Ray signed it. He's standing there with that pen, and people are signing it because it's the day after the funeral, and nobody wants to be the one who makes trouble.
Did you sign it? I asked. The line was quiet for a second.
Not yet, she said. That's why I'm calling.
I told her I would call her back. I hung up and I sat there and I thought about my brother going door to door with a typed page the day after we buried our father, getting our aunts and uncles to put their names to the idea that I had been there for personal interest. 4 months. I had learned which side my father liked his pillow on. I had learned the sound his breathing made when he needed the nurse and the sound it made when he was only dreaming. I had pushed his wheelchair out to the porch every clear afternoon so he could watch the light come down through the maple he planted the year I was born. Personal interest. 4 months in a hospital chair while my brother sent flowers from 3 states away. Is that hanging around for a cut? Or is that the son who stayed? Tell me. I sat with those 2 words a long time. Personal interest. I thought about what they were meant to erase. There is no money in a feeding cup. There is no inheritance in learning to read a face that has stopped making most of its old expressions, in knowing from across the room that he wanted the blinds turned because the light had moved, in being the one who could tell the difference between the cough that meant nothing and the cough that meant you ran for the nurse. There is no cut in that. There is no angle. You do it or you do not do it. And for 4 months I did it. And across those same 4 months my brother sent 2 arrangements of flowers and a card with a printed signature and called the front desk twice, both times to ask whether our father was awake, and both times, when he was told yes, said he would try again later. I knew that because the duty nurse told me. She told me kindly, the way you tell a man a thing she thinks he already knows. I had not known. I had assumed, the way you assume of a brother, that the calls I did not see were calls that happened. They had not happened. And now the man who did not make them had typed the word presence onto a page and put a modifier in front of it, personal interest, and was walking it around a kitchen, collecting names. That was the part that took the wind out of me, sitting in room 11. Not the lie. The craft of the lie. Russell had not lost his temper at the grave. He had not said a wild thing in grief. He had stood up at a measured pace with Marlene's hand placed just so, and delivered sentences he had clearly turned over beforehand, and then he had gone home and reduced 4 months of my life to a clause in a document. A man does not do that in a fog. A man does that when he has decided well in advance that the truth is a thing he cannot afford. I did not understand yet what he could not afford. I only understood that he had decided it before he ever handed me my coat. I called Whitfield. He had given me his number before he left, written on the back of a card in a small, careful hand, and he answered on the first ring like a man who had been waiting. "He's getting people to sign something," I told him. "A family statement. He's calling himself the head of the household, and he's calling me a man who showed up for personal interest, and he's getting Marlene and Ray to put their names on it. He's doing it right now, at the kitchen table." There was a pause. When Whitfield spoke, his voice had changed. It had gone very level, very slow, the way a man's voice goes when he has decided something.
"The kitchen table," he repeated. "He's doing it at the kitchen table, in your father's house."
"Yes."
"All right," Whitfield said. "Now listen to me, Eli, because this is the only thing I'm going to ask of you. And then your father's instructions take over, and you don't have to do anything else. I need you to not sign anything. I need you to not call Russell, not argue with him, not go near that house. A piece of paper that 30 people signed at a kitchen table the day after a funeral is worth exactly nothing against a will your father signed in front of a notary. Nothing. Do you understand me? He can get the whole county to sign it. It's a sheet of paper with names on it. It is not the law. The will is the law."
"Then why is he doing it?" I said.
"Because he doesn't know about the will," Whitfield said. "Or he's praying I'll let it lie. He's building the only thing he knows how to build. A room full of people who've already agreed with his version. He wants every name on that page before anybody can ask a question. He thinks if enough people sign it, it becomes true. A short breath. It doesn't become true, but I'll grant him this. He moves fast."
I asked him the thing I had been afraid to ask. "Why is he so scared of me, Arthur? He's the older brother. He could have everything. Why does he need a piece of paper that says I was never anything?" The line was quiet long enough that I thought I had lost him.
"Your father knew the answer to that," Whitfield said at last. "It's in the case, and I'm not going to give it to you in pieces in a phone call, because you'd spend the next 3 days turning it over instead of resting, and you need to rest. But I'll tell you this much, and then you let it alone. Russell was not at that grave defending your father's memory. Russell was at that grave protecting himself. Those are different things, and by the time we're through, every person who signed his page is going to know the difference. Now, go to bed."
He hung up, and I lay back on the bed in room 11 with my coat still on, and I looked at the water stain on the ceiling, and I tried to do what he said and rest. I did not rest. I lay there and I thought about a leather case I was not allowed to open, and a will I had never seen, and a tape with my father's voice on it that I would not hear until a room full of the people who had watched me take my coat heard it too. I called Dana back. I told her what Whitfield had told me to tell her, which was nothing, only that she should do what felt right to her, and that no one could make her sign anything. I did not tell her about the case. I had been told not to, and I had spent 4 months learning to do exactly what my father asked, and the habit held.
"Ellie," she said, before she hung up, "at the grave, when he said all that about you." A long pause. "I believed him. I want you to know that I believed him, because I think you should know who I was that day. He's good at it." He had Marlene's hand on his shoulder, and his wife standing there, and he said it so calm, like he was just saying the obvious thing nobody had the nerve to say. And I stood there and I thought, well, Russell would know. He's the oldest. And I looked away from you. I looked at my shoes like everybody else.
Why are you telling me this? I said.
Because the more I think about it, the more I can't make it fit, she said. I keep thinking about who answered the phone every time I called the hospital. It was you. It was always you. Russell never picked up once, not once in 4 months. And then he stands at the grave and tells me you were the one who wasn't there? Her voice caught. Something's wrong with the math, Eli. That's all I know right now. Something's wrong with the math.
I held the phone after she hung up. Outside, the light over the parking lot buzzed and flickered. Something was wrong with the math. She did not know how right she was, and I could not tell her, because the only person allowed to fix the math was a narrow, careful old man in a gray coat who was, at that moment, sitting somewhere across town deciding exactly how to call this family. Back to the house my brother had just changed the locks on. He called me a few days after he came to the motel. I picked up before the second ring.
It's done, Whitfield said. I've sent it out, every name on Russell's page, plus a few he left off on purpose. A letter on my own letterhead, certified mail, signature required, so no one can say they never got it. It says I am the executor named in the last will and testament of Walter Marsh, that the document Russell has been circulating has no legal standing, and that I am calling a reading of the genuine instrument at the residence on Cedar Street, 7 o'clock Friday evening. Attendance requested of the entire family.
At the house, I said.
At the house, Whitfield said. At the kitchen table, Eli. The same table where he's been collecting signatures. Your father was very particular about the room. A pause. Russell got my letter an hour ago. He's already called me twice. I haven't answered.
What's he going to do? I said.
I expect, Whitfield said slowly, he's going to spend the next few days trying to find out what's in that case before Friday. And he won't be able to, because the only people who know are me, a notary who's bound to say nothing, and your father, who is past asking. There was something in his voice then, something old and tired and certain. He's going to walk into that kitchen Friday at 7 o'clock not knowing what's coming. The same way you walked up to that grave not knowing. I think your father wanted it that way. I think that's the one thing he and I didn't write down and didn't have to.
Near 2 weeks. I have never spent 2 longer ones. I moved out of room 11 and into a room across the hall that had a better window, for no reason except that I needed to do something with my hands and packing a bag was something. I bought a razor at the gas station and shaved in a mirror the size of a paperback. I ate at a diner 2 blocks down where the waitress learned my order by the second morning and stopped asking. I did the math of a man with near 2 weeks and nothing he is allowed to do. Whitfield had been plain with me. Do not call Russell. Do not go near the house. Do not argue. Do not defend yourself. Do not sign anything. Do not so much as drive down Cedar Street. So I did none of it, and the not doing was its own kind of labor. Dana called me twice more across those 2 weeks, and what she told me built a picture I had not asked for and could not stop looking at. Russell, it turned out, was not handling Whitfield's letter the way a man with nothing to hide handles a letter. He had called the rest of the family in a kind of controlled hurry, telling each of them that the old man was confused, that Whitfield was past it, that there was no other will and never had been, that Friday was a formality, and they should come and put the whole thing to rest. He told Marlene the lawyer friend had always resented the family. He told Uncle Ray that grief did strange things to old men and that Whitfield had gotten an idea in his head. He was, Dana said, working the phone the way a man works a phone when he is trying to get a story locked down before someone else can tell a different one.
He came by my place last night. Dana told me on the 3rd day. He never comes by my place. He stood in my doorway and he asked me, real friendly, whether I'd signed the statement yet, and I said I'd been busy, and he smiled and said, "Don't let it slip my mind, families got to stick together," and then he asked me, "Eli," he asked me if you'd called me. Just like that. Had Eli called and I lied, I said no. And he looked at me a second too long, and then he said, "Good, because Eli's not in his right mind right now, and the kindest thing is to give him room. Give him room." A short, ugly laugh. He changed the locks on his dead father's house, and he's telling me to give you room.
I did not say much to that. I was learning a thing about my brother across those 2 weeks, learning it the slow way, through a phone in a motel, that a man who is sure of his ground does not spend the week before a will reading calling 20 relatives to tell them the lawyer is senile. A man does that when he is afraid of what the lawyer is holding. Whitfield had said it on the phone, and I had not fully believed it. Russell was not protecting our father. He was protecting himself, and the more calls he made, the louder that fact got, until even Dana, who had looked away from me at the grave, could hear it.
"And it isn't only me," Dana said, before she hung up the second time. "Marlene called me yesterday. Aunt Marlene, who signed his paper first, who had her hand on his shoulder at the grave. She wasn't calling about anything. That was the thing. She was just circling. She asked me, kind of out of nowhere, did I remember the last time I actually saw Russell at the hospital? And then, before I could answer, she said, "Never mind, it doesn't matter," and changed the subject to the casseroles. A pause on the line. "She's started counting too, Eli. She doesn't know she's doing it." But she asked the question. You don't ask the question unless something's already gone loose.
She started counting too. I wrote nothing down, and I told Dana nothing, but I held on to that one, the aunt whose hand had tightened on Russell's shoulder at the grave, 3 days later asking a cousin to help her remember a thing she should not have needed help remembering. I did not know yet what Friday would do to that hand. I only knew it had started to ask a question, and a hand that has started asking is a hand on its way off a shoulder. On the 14th night, I could not sleep at all, and against everything Whitfield told me, I got in my car at 2 in the morning and I drove. Not down Cedar Street. I told myself I would not, and I did not. But I drove the long way around the block, the way you circle a thing you are not allowed to touch, and from the cross street I could see the house through the gap between the Hendersons' hedges. The porch light was on. The new brass lock caught the street light and threw it back. Bright, wrong, the only new thing on a 30-year-old door, and on the porch, set out by the rail where Russell had left it, was the box. My box. The clothes from the spare room. Close on 2 weeks it had sat out there in the weather, on the boards where I had set my father's chair every afternoon, and Russell had not so much as moved it inside. He had left it out there for the whole street to see, the way you leave a thing you have thrown away. I sat in my car at the cross street, and I looked at my own box on my father's porch, and then I drove back to the motel, and Friday came. He told me to be there at 6:45. Not before. He told me to come to the front door, the one with the new brass lock, and not to try my old key, and not to knock, because he would be the one to open it, and he wanted Russell to see who opened the door of the house he thought he owned. Then he said the thing that has stayed with me longer than anything else he said in that whole week.
"Your father set a hook by that door 30 years ago," Whitfield said, "for the keys. You know the one. Right side as you go in. He hung his keys there every night of his life. I noticed it's empty now. Russell took them down." A breath. "Friday, I'd like you to be the one standing closest to it when we play the tape. Your father asked me for that. I didn't understand it at the time. I think I'm starting to."
And then he was gone, and I was standing in room 11 with the phone still at my ear, near 2 weeks to wait, and a single image I could not put down. the empty hook by the green door where my father's keys had hung for 30 years, and the chair he used to sit in turned to face the wall. I kept the coat. That is the small thing, the thing that does not look like anything, and it is where this part of it starts. At the graveside, Russell had taken the coat off the back of a folding chair and handed it to me with both hands, the way you hand a man his hat at a door you want him gone through. He had said the words in front of everyone first, and then he had handed me the coat, and the coat was the period at the end of the sentence. Leave before the family eats. I took it. I did not put it on. I carried it folded over my arm to the car like a waiter, and I drove to the motel, and the first thing I did in that room was lay it flat on the second bed and not touch it again. I want to be clear about why. I am not a man who saves things. I throw out birthday cards. But 4 months in a hospital chair teaches you that the small thing is sometimes the only true thing left. Because the big things, the speeches and the flowers, and the head of the house standing up at the dinner table, those can all be staged. The coat could not be staged. Russell had touched it. Russell had decided I should be wearing it on my way out the door. And some part of me knew, sitting on that motel bed at 1 in the morning, that a day was coming when somebody was going to ask me what exactly happened at that grave. And I wanted the coat in the room when they did. So I kept it, and I wrote down the 2 words. Dad had given me 2 words in his last clear week, with his hand on my wrist, and a name, and I had carried them for 4 months without using them. The night of the burial, I took a pen off the motel nightstand, the kind they chained to the desk, and on the back of the funeral program I wrote, "He did it," and under it I wrote, "Whitfield." I did not need to write them down. I was never going to forget them, but I wrote them down the way you photograph a thing you are afraid you will later be told you imagined. People were already telling me, through Russell's mouth, that I had imagined my own place in my own family. I was not going to let them tell me later that I had imagined my father's voice on my wrist. Then I kept the number ready, the way you keep a thing ready that you have already used. I had called Whitfield from the parking lot the first night, and he had said almost nothing, only, "Where are you?" and "Stay there, and I will come Thursday." And I had waited. That is the part people do not believe when I tell it. That I waited days in a motel a mile from the house I grew up in and did nothing, made no scene, called no aunt, posted nothing. 4 months in a hospital chair while my brother sent flowers from 3 states away. Is that hanging around for a cut, or is that the son who stayed? Tell me. Because I had decided a long time before the burial that whatever I did next, I was going to do the thing my father told me to do, in the order he told me to do it, and not one thing more. He had not said make a scene. He had said call Whitfield. So I called Whitfield, and I kept the coat, and I waited. There was more to that Thursday, the one he came to the motel, than I have told you so far. I have told you how he set the leather case on the table by the window and would not open it there. How he told me there was a recording in his own voice and the real document with the notary's seal on it, and how he said your father did not want you carrying it alone in a room like this. That was the front of the visit. But before he picked his hat up off his knee to go, he told me there was a third thing in that case, a thing my father had not given him but he had gathered himself. And that is the part that turned the whole burial inside out for me.
"There's one more thing in here," Whitfield said, with his hand flat on the case. "2 of these your father gave me. This last one I went and got myself, because I did not entirely trust your brother, and I am old enough not to apologize for it." He let a breath go. "Your brother was not at that hospital."
I told him I knew that. I was the one who was there. I knew exactly who was and was not in the room.
"No," he said. "You knew he was not there the way a man knows his brother did not visit. I am telling you something colder than that. I am telling you it is written down. There is a log."
And he took out the visitor log. I had forgotten the log existed. Every floor has one, the clipboard at the nurse's station you sign when you come and sign when you go, and for 4 months my name went on it twice a day, in and out, in my own bad handwriting, until the handwriting got worse from the chair and the bad coffee. Whitfield had asked the hospital for a copy of those 4 months, and he had it, page after page, and he had gone through it with a yellow marker, and he laid it on the bed next to the case and the coat and turned it so I could read it.
"Count the yellow," he said.
There was no yellow. I want to say that again because I sat there for a long time over it. There was not one yellow mark on 4 months of pages. Russell's name was not on the log. Not once. Not the week Dad was admitted. Not the week the doctors changed the plan. Not the bad week in the dead of that first winter. Not the last clear week when Dad put his hand on my wrist and gave me 2 words. My brother, who had stood at the grave and called me the one who hung around waiting for a cut, had not signed into the building one single time.
"He came to the funeral," Whitfield said. "He came to the burial. He came to the... The log does not lie about which one of those a man can stage and which one he cannot. A funeral you show up to in a good coat. A hospital you show up to at 2 in the morning when there is no one there to see you do it." He squared the pages. "Your father knew the log was there too, by the way. He told me to get it. He said, 'Get the log, because Russell will tell a room full of relatives a story, and the log will be the part of the story Russell forgot was being kept.'"
I asked him why Russell would do it. Why a man would not visit his own dying father even once, and then stand up and throw the brother who did out of the house. I told Whitfield I had been asking myself that for days, and I could not make it add up to anything but cruelty for its own sake, and I did not actually believe in cruelty for its own sake, not in my own brother, not all the way down.
"It is not for its own sake," Whitfield said. "It never is. It just looks that way from the inside of it." And then he told me about the money.
He did not have all of it. He was careful to say that. Careful the way old men are careful when they have learned that a half-true thing said with confidence does more damage than a lie. But he had enough. Russell's business had gone down. It had been going down for 2 years quietly, the way those things go down, where the man at the top keeps a good coat on and a good car in the lot and the floor falling out underneath the whole time. There were debts. There were people Russell owed who were not the kind of people you put off forever. And there was a wife, Claire, and there was Claire's family, who had thought they were marrying their daughter to a man who was the head of something.
"Your brother spent 2 years," Whitfield said, "becoming a man who could not afford to be found out, and a man who cannot afford to be found out cannot afford a hospital log either. Because the day that log gets read out, everyone in that family does the same arithmetic you just did. They count the yellow, and there is none. And then they look at where Russell actually was for 4 months, which was 3 states away, not at a bedside. Because a bedside does not pay a debt, and a bedside does not impress your wife's father. He put the log back in the case, so he had to make sure nobody ever wanted to read the log. And the way you do that, the only way, is you stand up before anyone else can, and you tell the room that the man who was at the bedside was only there for the money. You accuse the loyal one of the exact thing you are guilty of. You do it first, and you do it loud, and you do it at the grave, where no one is going to argue with you over an open hole in the ground."
I sat with that. Dad gave me 2 words and a phone number in his last clear week. I carried them 4 months without using them. Would you have called Whitfield that first night, or waited like I did? Because I will tell you what the waiting got me. It got me to a Thursday in a motel room where an old man laid 4 months of unmarked pages on a bedspread next to a coat my brother had handed me. And for the first time since the dirt went in, I understood that I had not been thrown out of my family. I had been thrown out of the way. There is a difference. A man throws out what he hates. He throws out of the way what he is afraid of. Russell was not disgusted by me. Russell was afraid of the log, and I was the one who had signed it. Whitfield closed the case.
"Here is what your father wanted," he said, "and I am going to do it the way he wanted it, not the way that would feel good. He did not want me to mail you a copy of the will. and let you wave it at your brother in a parking lot. He said that would just turn into your word against Russell's, 2 brothers and a piece of paper, and the family would split down the middle and stay split, and that is not what he wanted. He wanted it done in front of the same people who watched Russell do it to you. He wanted the relatives back in that house, at that table, and he wanted them to hear it from him, not from you and not from me. He has a thing about hearing it from him. He stood up and put his hat back on. So that is what we are going to do. I have the standing to call them. I am the one holding the document, and people come when the man holding the document calls, even people who would not cross the street for you or me. Give me a few days. I will gather them.
I asked him if he was sure they would come. The same aunts, the same cousins, the ones who had watched me carry my coat to the car and had not said one word.
They will come, Whitfield said, because they are curious, and curiosity is the one thing thicker than blood in a family like yours. They watched something happen at that grave they did not understand. People will drive a long way to find out what they watched. At the door he stopped. One more thing, do not go to the house before then. Do not knock on it. Do not be seen near it. When you walk back into that house, I want it to be the night I opened this case, and not 1 minute before. Can you do that?
I told him I had kept the coat folded near a week. I could keep myself folded a few more. He almost smiled. Then he left, and I did the hardest waiting of the whole thing, which was the waiting where I knew the case existed, and I knew what was probably in it, and I still had to sit in a motel a mile away and do nothing. Dana found me on the second of those days. Dana is my cousin, Russell's age, one of the ones who had stood at the grave. She had not squeezed Russell's shoulder the way Aunt Marlene had, but she had been there, in the half circle, and she had looked at me carrying the coat, and she had looked away. She had called me once already those first days, a phone held at arm's length while she worked out what she believed, and I had not let myself count on her. So when she knocked on the motel door in person, the phone call turned into a coat and a car and a face at my door. I almost did not open it. Some part of me still thought Russell might have sent her. I was wrong about that, and I had been wrong to half write her off. And being wrong about Dana is one of the few things in this whole story I am glad to have been wrong about.
He used me, she said. She said it before she was even all the way in the door. I told you on the phone something was wrong with the math. Well, I did the math. Russell used me, Eli, and I let him, and I have been sick about it ever since.
I asked her to sit down. She would not sit down.
The week before the funeral, she said, he called me. Russell never calls me. He called me and he was so warm. You would not believe how warm. Asking about my kids. Asking did I remember the lake house when we were little. And then somewhere in the middle of all that warm, he said the thing. He said Eli has been strange about Dad's money. He said you were hovering. He said the family needed to close ranks before you did something, and that it would mean a lot to him if I stood with him at the burial, so it did not look like just him saying it. And I did. I stood there. I stood there, and I let it look like the whole family thought it, when really it was him saying it, and me lending him my face.
I told her she had not said anything at the grave. I had been listening for it.
That is exactly it, she said. I did not have to say anything. That was the genius of it. He did not need me to accuse you. He just needed me standing there next to him, so that when he accused you, it looked like he was speaking for all of us. He needed bodies. He needed a half circle. I was a body in the half circle. She was not crying. She was past crying, into the colder thing on the other side of it. And the worst part is I knew. Somewhere I knew. Because Russell was not at the hospital, Eli. None of us were, but Russell really was not. And I knew that, and I stood there anyway and let him call you the one who was only in it for the money. You, the one who was actually there."
And there it was again. The log. She had not seen Whitfield's pages. She did not know a log had been pulled, but she had arrived at the same place on her own, the simple arithmetic of who was in the room and who was not. That is the thing about what Russell did. It only held up if no one stopped to count. The second anyone counted, it fell over. Dana had counted, days too late, and it had made her physically ill.
"I have something of his," she said.
I asked what.
"Uncle Walt's keys," she said. "His spare set, the ones with the brass tag. He gave them to me years ago when he had his knee done, so somebody besides Russell could get in and check on him, and I never gave them back. And Russell does not know I have them." She took them out of her coat pocket and held them in her closed hand, not offering them, just showing me she had them, like a card she was not ready to play. "Russell changed the locks the night of the burial. Did you know that? He changed the front locks that same night. I drove by. I do not know why I drove by, but I did, and there was a locksmith's van in the driveway at 9 at night, the day they put my uncle in the ground."
I knew. I had stood on that porch the night of the burial with my own father's keys, the set I had carried for years, and put them to the front lock, and felt them not turn. Russell had not waited a full day. He had not even waited for the dirt to settle before he made sure the keys I had would never open that door again. The hook by the door where Dad's keys had hung for 30 years, the hook I had reached past 10,000 times to wheel him out onto the porch. That hook I could not see from outside in the dark, but I knew the keys were not on it, because the keys that had been on it were the same ones that were not turning in my hand. I did not tell Dana about Whitfield yet. I told her to keep the brass tag keys, to keep them safe, and to do one thing for me. "Come to the house," I said, "when the old man calls. Whitfield. He is going to call the family back to the house. I cannot tell you why yet. But when he calls, come, and bring those keys, but do not give them to anyone. Just have them in your pocket. Can you do that?"
"Whitfield is calling everyone back to the house," she repeated. "Russell's house."
"It is not Russell's house," I said. It was the first time I had said it out loud, and I did not entirely know yet how true it was, only that Dad had told me one thing in his last clear week, and I had decided to believe the whole shape of it on faith. "Just come." She looked at me for a long moment, the keys still closed in her hand. Then she put them back in her pocket.
"Okay," she said. "I will come. And Eli, for whatever it is worth, which is nothing, I am sorry I stood in that half-circle." She stopped at the door, the same place Whitfield had stopped. "What is on it? Whatever Whitfield has. There is something, isn't there? You have the look of a man who is holding something and waiting."
I told her she would hear it when everyone heard it. I told her that was the way Dad wanted it, hearing it from him, and that I was done doing anything except the things my father had told me to do, in the order he told me to do them. She left, and then it was just the waiting again, and the coat on the second bed, and 4 months of unmarked pages in a leather case across town in an old man's office, and a set of keys with a brass tag in my cousin's coat pocket. Here is how it sat by those last nights. The floor I'd walked into the burial on was simple. I was the son who stayed, 4 months in the chair, a name and 2 words given to me with a hand on my wrist. Russell had stood over the open grave, called me the one who hung around for a cut, handed me my coat, and changed the locks before the dirt settled. But Whitfield had shown me a second floor under that one, and a third under that. Russell had not signed the hospital log once, and the reason was the money. A business 2 years gone, debts of the impatient kind, a wife and a wife's family who thought they'd married the head of something. The log was the one paper that could find him out, my name all over it and his nowhere, so he stood up first and accused the loyal one of his own crime out loud over a hole nobody argues across. He hadn't thrown me out because he hated me. He'd thrown me out of the way, so one room of relatives would never stop to count. That was what I knew now that I had not known at the burial, and it did not make me angrier. It made me quieter. I had walked into Whitfield's Thursday wanting to hate my brother. I walked out of it understanding that Russell was mostly afraid of a clipboard with no yellow on it, of his wife's father, of a debt with a date on it, and the wanting to hate went somewhere I could not find it. I still meant to let my father stop him. I just stopped needing it to be hot. I lay on the motel bed those last nights, and I did not rehearse anything. People assume I must have rehearsed it, what I would say, how I would stand. I did not. There was nothing for me to say. That was the strange mercy of how Dad had set it up. He had arranged it so that the one thing I would not have to do in the room with all of them, the room I had been carried out of, was talk. The talking had already been done. It was done 4 months ago in a hospital bed, into a recorder I had never heard, by a man with his hand on my wrist. All I had to do was be in the room when somebody else pressed play. Whitfield called on a Tuesday.
Friday evening, he said. 7 o'clock. I have asked them to the house. I told them I am the executor of Walter's estate, and that there is a matter I am obligated to present to the family in person, and that it concerns the property, and that is all true, and it was enough. Marlene asked if you would be there. I said that was not for me to say. Russell asked if he could see the document first, privately. I told him no. I told him I do not show the document to anyone before I show it to everyone, and he did not like that, and there was a long silence on his end. And then he said, "Fine, Friday," because what else could he say? A man who refuses to let the family hear the will looks exactly like a man with something to hide. A pause. Be at the end of the street at 6:45. Not before. We walk in together.
I asked him if Russell knew I was coming.
Russell knows there is a tape, Whitfield said, because your father told him there was before he died. He told both of you, in different words. He told you to call me if Russell ever read you out of the family. He told Russell, more gently, that there were arrangements, and that I had them, and that a day would come when they would be read out. Russell has known for months that this Friday was possible. He gambled that you would never make the call. He gambled that the loyal son would be too proud, or too gutted, or too decent to pick up the phone from a motel parking lot and say 2 words to an old man. He let that sit. He bet his whole hand on you being too good to fight back. Be at the end of the street at 6:45. And remember the order, he said before he hung up. Not before they're all in and gathered. I'll have a way to know. I've asked Marlene to text me when the last car's in, and they've sat down to it. She thinks it's only so I won't keep them waiting. The second I get that, we walk. Until then, we stand at the end of the street, you and me, and we let your brother run the room he thinks is his, all the way up to the minute it stops being his.
Until the minute it stops being his. I held that the way I'd held the 2 words for 4 months. Somewhere across town, a table was going to fill, and a phone was going to buzz in an old man's coat pocket, and only 2 people on earth would know that the buzz was the start of it. Russell would be at the head of his own table, not knowing a clock he couldn't see had been wound a year ago and set to go off the minute they were all in the room. I did not know what would come out of the box on that table. I only knew the hour it would come, and that I was to stand in the street until it did. I was at the end of the street at 6:45. It was June and still light, the long, flat light of an early summer evening in Hartley, and the cars were already in the driveway and along the curb, more cars than I had seen at that house since the last Christmas Dad was well. Aunt Marlene's, Uncle Ray's, 2 cousins I had not seen in a year. Dana's, parked a little apart from the rest, the way you park when you are not sure you are staying. And Russell's good car in the spot it always took, nose out, ready to leave, the way Russell parked everywhere, even at his own front door. Whitfield was waiting on the corner with the leather case. He did not say anything encouraging. He just looked at me to see if I was going to hold, and I held. And he nodded, and we walked up the street together to the porch. The porch. I had not stood on it since the night of the burial. The wicker rocker was still turned to face the wall, the way I had found it that first night. My father's rocker, the one I had wheeled him out beside every afternoon, turned into the siding like a piece of furniture nobody wanted to look at. And beside the door, by the porch light, there was a cardboard box. My handwriting was not on it. Russell's was. My name on the side in Russell's block letters, ELI, and inside it, when I glanced down, the few things of mine that had still been in the house. A couple of my books, my reading glasses, the charger and the sweater I'd left in the spare room for the 4 months I lived there. Russell had not even thrown the box out. He had set it on the porch, by the door, where a man leaves the thing he is returning to someone he expects never to let inside again. He had put me out the way you put out the recycling. The hook by the door above the box was empty. Dad's keys were not on it. They were on a new ring, on a new lock, inside. And there was one more thing on those boards, and I noticed it and said nothing, because I did not have a place to put it yet. Where the rocker had stood for 30 years, there was a pale patch in the porch paint, the exact size and shape of its two runners, worn down through the green to the gray underneath by a chair that had sat in one spot longer than I'd been alive. Russell had dragged the rocker off that patch to turn it to the wall, and the patch was just sitting there now, bare, in the shape of the chair that belonged on it. I looked at it a second too long. I'll tell you later why a worn place in some old paint mattered more to me by the end of that night than anything Whitfield carried in the case. Whitfield saw me look at the box.
"Leave it," he said quietly. "You are not carrying that out tonight. You are walking in past it." And he opened the door, which was unlocked now because the family was inside, and we went in past the box and the empty hook and the rocker facing the wall into my father's house, where I had not been allowed to eat.
They were in the dining room. It is a small house and a small dining room, and there were a lot of them, so they had spilled into the doorway and along the wall, and the table was in the middle of it the way it had always been, the table I had been told to leave before the family sat down to it. They were not eating now. They were standing around it, holding glasses they were not drinking from, and when Whitfield and I came in, the whole room did the thing a room does when the thing it was nervous about finally walks in. It went quiet. Then it went quieter than quiet. Russell was at the head of the table. Of course he was. He had taken the head of the table the way he took the parking spot, nose out, head of the house, and he had a hand resting flat on the wood like a man who owns the wood, and when he saw me, his face did a thing I had been waiting near 2 weeks to see and had not let myself hope for, which was nothing. He kept it at nothing. But his hand on the table closed, slowly, into not quite a fist, and I knew he had bet his whole hand on me being too good to walk through that door, and I knew that he knew, the second I walked through it, that he had bet wrong.
"Arthur," he said to Whitfield, very even, very much the head of the house. "I did not realize you were bringing a guest."
"Ely is not a guest," Whitfield said. "Ely is family. We are about to establish that on the record." He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice the entire time. He just walked, with the leather case, to the table, the same table, and the relatives parted to let him through the way they had not parted for me at the grave. Marlene took a half-step back. Ray put his glass down. Dana, against the far wall, had one hand in her coat pocket and did not move at all.
Whitfield set the case on the table. He set it down on the exact table I had been told to leave before the family ate, in the exact room they had carried me out of, in front of the exact people who had watched it happen and said nothing, and he opened the two clasps, one and then the other, and he reached in and he took out the recorder. It was an old thing, gray, no bigger than a paperback, with a single black button on the top of it. He set it in the center of the table where the centerpiece would go. He turned it so the button faced up toward the room, toward all of us.
Arthur, Russell said, and for the first time there was something underneath the even. Whatever that is, I think the family should discuss the appropriateness of.
Your father, Whitfield said, asked me to play this for the family in this house, with everyone present. You are everyone. You are present. He looked around the room once, slowly, at every face, at Marlene and Ray and the cousins and Dana, and last of all at Russell at the head of the table. Then he looked down at the grey box with the single black button, and he put one finger on it. "This is your father," he said. "He recorded it himself. He told me the date he recorded it, and he wanted me to say the date out loud before I play it, so that no one in this room can ever say it was made under anyone's hand but his own."
Russell's hand came off the table. It closed at his side, down where the wood could not steady it, but he did not leave the head of the table, because leaving the head of the table would have said something, and Marlene's hand stayed where it had been since the grave, flat on his shoulder, though she was not looking at him now. She was looking at the gray box. Ray was looking at the recorder. The cousins were looking at the recorder. Dana, against the wall, had taken the brass tag keys halfway out of her pocket without seeming to know she had done it. Every face in the room I had been carried out of was turned toward the small gray thing in the center of the table where the centerpiece used to go, and none of them was turned toward Russell, who was used to being the thing rooms turned toward, and who had just lost it without a word being said. I did not look at the recorder. I looked at my father's chair, the one at the foot of the table, the one nobody had taken, the one no one ever took. And I thought about his hand on my wrist. Whitfield said the date out loud. He said it plainly, a month and a day and a year. The last spring my father still had his wits clear enough to set it all down, and the saying of it changed the air in the room, because a date is a fact, and a fact does not care who is the head of the house. The date sat in the air a moment, and nobody filled it. Russell did not say, "Turn it off again." He had said it once, and it had not worked, and a man like Russell does not spend the second one until he knows it will land. And he did not know, because for the first time in that room, he was not the one deciding what happened next. The gray box was. I stood by the porch door with the hook empty over my shoulder, and I did not look at the box. I looked at the foot of the table, at my father's chair, the one nobody had taken, and I waited the way I had waited 2 weeks in a motel a mile away, the way I had waited 4 months in a hospital chair, the last waiting of the whole thing, the few seconds between the date said out loud and the thing that would come after it. Whitfield reached down and put one finger on the single black button. With his free hand, he laid one thick envelope and one thin one on the table beside the recorder, squared them under his palm, and left the thin one there under his hand. Then he pressed it. There was a hiss first, the sound of a small room recorded somewhere quieter than ours, a chair settling, a clock I half recognized. And then my father's voice came out of that little black box and went around the kitchen the way it used to go around the kitchen. And every head at the table turned toward the recorder because the man it belonged to was nearly 2 weeks in the ground a half-mile up the hill. I had not heard him speak in 5 weeks. That is long enough to start to lose the exact sound of a voice. It is not long enough to forget it. The voice was his, exactly his, steady, a little slower than the man who'd raised me. And I stood in the doorway of a house I'd been locked out of and listened to my father start with the date, the way you'd date a check. Walt. This is Walter Marsh. Today is the 3rd of April. I'm in Arthur Whitfield's office, and he has the original, and I have my wits, whatever's left of them, which is enough for this. If you're hearing my voice, then I'm gone, and Arthur is doing the one thing I asked him to do, and you're all sitting in my kitchen. Good, sit. Somebody pulled in a breath. Marlene's hand was still on Russell's shoulder. My father's voice kept going, plain, in no hurry, a man reading a list he'd thought hard about before he wrote it. Walt. I'm going to say some things, and I'm going to say them in order, because the order is the whole point of them. I have 2 sons, Russell and Eli. I love them both, I'm allowed to say what's true about them anyway because I'm the one who's gone and there's no profit in me lying now. The kitchen had stopped pretending to be a gathering. Russell's jaw had set. He was looking at the recorder the way you look at a dog you're not sure of. Walt. Eli stayed. I want it on this tape in his own father's voice, because I know what gets said after a man dies, and I know who says it. For the last 4 months I was sick. Eli was in the chair by my bed, every night. He learned which side I liked the pillow. He pushed me out to the porch every afternoon at 4 because that's the hour the light comes across the yard, and he sat with me there and didn't fill it up with talk. He cleaned me when I couldn't do it myself, and he never once made me feel the size of that. That's not a man waiting around for a house. I had 4 months to watch what a man waiting around for a house looks like, and it doesn't look like that. It looks like the other thing. Marlene's hand came off Russell's shoulder. She did not do it loud. It just was not there anymore, and her chair scraped an inch back from his, and she put both her hands in her own lap, and she did not put them anywhere near him again the rest of the night. Walt. Russell did not come. Not once. I'm not going to dress that up. I called him. He sent flowers twice, and he sent his wife's regards, and he was 3 states away running a business I now understand was already underwater, and he did not come. And I knew why he didn't come, and I'll get to it. I'm his father. I'm allowed to say he wasn't here. He wasn't here. Russell said the first thing he'd said since the tape started. It came out flat and low, aimed at Whitfield, not at the table.
Turn it off, Arthur. This is a private family matter, and you're a guest in it.
I'm not a guest, Russell. I'm the executor. Your father made me that in writing 11 years ago and again last spring, and he left me an instruction with the tape, and the instruction was that if anybody told me to turn it off, I was to say their name into the room and keep going. So, Russell, I'm keeping going.
He did not turn it off. My father's voice was still running underneath all of it, and Whitfield reached over and nudged the volume up half a turn so the room could not pretend not to hear it. Walt. Here is what I'm doing with what I have. The house and everything in it, and the ground it sits on, goes to Eli. Not because Eli needs it. He doesn't, and that's half the reason I can give it to him clean. I'm giving it to him because he's the one who stayed, and a man ought to be able to leave his house to the one who sat in it with him while he died. I had it drawn up properly. Arthur has the will, signed and notarized, and it says what I just said, in the dry words lawyers use, and the dry words and my words mean the same thing. I did not move from the doorway. I had not known. I want to be honest about that, because people assume the son who comes out ahead had it figured the whole time. I hadn't. My father had told me to call Whitfield and say, he did it, and he'd told me Whitfield would bring the tape, and that was the entire map I'd been given. I didn't know what was on the tape until it was coming out of the box in my own father's voice in front of all of them. I found out the same minute they did. The only thing I'd had that they hadn't was 4 months in a chair and a wrist with his hand on it and 2 words. Whitfield let the tape run to a soft click and a few seconds of room hiss and then nothing, and he pressed the button, and the kitchen was the kitchen again, except it was never going to be only the kitchen again. He let the silence sit. Then he opened the thick envelope.
That's his voice. Anybody in this room doubts it's his voice.
Nobody doubted it was his voice. Uncle Ray, who'd watched Russell hand me my coat and said nothing, was looking at the floor. A cousin near the window had her hand over her mouth. Dana was by the counter, very still, and she was not looking at Russell anymore either. She was looking at me.
Good. Then we don't have to argue about the voice. Now I'm going to put 3 things on this table, and you can all look at them on your way out, because some of you are going to want to.
He laid the first sheaf down flat and turned it so the room could read the top of it.
This is the will. Notarized the 3rd of April, the same day as the tape, witnessed by 2 people who aren't related to anybody here, recorded with the county the following week. It says what you just heard him say. The house and its contents and the land to Eli. It's been valid since the day he signed it. It was valid the night the locks got changed. It's valid right now.
He set the second paper down beside it, and this one I recognized because I'd watched half the room sign it.
And this is the other thing, the family statement. The one Russell passed around at the reception 3 of you put your names to, the one that says the family recognizes Russell as the head of the household and confirms the division of the estate as he's laid it out. I read it twice. It's a nice piece of writing. It has no more legal weight than a birthday card. You can't make yourself the head of a house by getting your aunts to sign a paper saying you are. There's already a paper that says who gets the house, and it isn't this one, and it predates this one, and the man who wrote it is the man whose voice you just heard.
Russell did not reach for the papers. He sat very straight, the way you sit when standing up would say something you don't want said. Whitfield set the third thing down, and the third thing was a folder, and he opened it without ceremony.
And this is the part I'd have left out if I were a kinder man than Walt asked me to be. A locksmith's invoice dated the night of the burial for the changing of the front and back locks of this house, paid by Russell Marsh, his card, his signature. Under it, a photograph somebody took the next morning of a cardboard box on this porch with Eli's name marked on the side in tape. The box his brother set out for him to find, on the porch, where the 2 of them watched their father die a little every afternoon at 4. I'm not going to say anything about that box. The box says it.
The room had gone past quiet into the thing under quiet. Marlene was looking at the photograph in the open folder, and then at Russell, and then back at the photograph, and you could watch nearly 2 weeks of a story she'd believed come loose in her face. When Dad's voice on that tape named who sat by him and who didn't, the aunt who'd squeezed Russell's shoulder at the grave took her hand back. What would you have done if you'd been in that kitchen? Russell tried once. I'll give him the once. He turned in his chair so he was talking to the room and not to Whitfield, and his voice came out reasonable, which was worse than if he'd shouted.
He was a sick old man. People say things at the end. They get sentimental. They get turned around. Somebody sits by the bed long enough, and they start rewriting who did what. I was running a business. I was keeping this family's name worth something, while my brother was playing nurse and counting the days. That's not a crime. Somebody had to be the grown-up about the practical side of things, and it sure wasn't going to be Eli.
Russell.
Don't rustle me, Arthur, you've been.
Russell, I have one more thing to read, and your father wrote it to you, and he told me to read it last, after the tape, in front of everybody, because he wanted you to have the chance to say it yourself first, and you just didn't. So now I read it.
He picked up the thin envelope, the one that had been sitting under his hand the whole time. He slid a single folded page out of it. He did not read it silently first. He read it the way it came.
It's dated the same week as the tape. It's addressed to Russell by name in Walt's hand, and it says, Russell, I know about the money. I've known since the fall. I know the business is gone, and I know how much you owe, and I know you've been keeping it from Claire's people and from me, because a man doesn't stay 3 states away from his dying father for a quiet phone problem. He stays away because coming home means somebody might find out he's drowning. I'm not writing to shame you. I'm writing to tell you I already made it right, if you'll let me. There's a fund set aside in your name. It's separate from the house. It's separate from everything Eli gets. It doesn't touch the house, and it never was going to. It's clean money, no strings, enough to get you standing again, and all you ever had to do to take it was sit down with me, or with Arthur after I'm gone, and say out loud that you needed it. That's it. That's the whole price. Say it out loud. I set it up so you wouldn't have to fight your brother for a roof to get yourself square. Take the fund, Russell. It was always yours. It is still yours.
Whitfield put the page down on top of the will, flat, where everyone could see Walt's handwriting on it.
He gave me this last spring. He told me Russell knew it existed, He said he'd told him himself on the phone, in so many words, before he went. So, he looked at Russell for the first time all night. You knew there was a clean way out sitting in my office with your name on it. All you had to do was say you needed help. And instead you drove up here the day we put him in the ground, and you stood in front of all these people, and you rid your brother out of the family, and you changed the locks on the house so that nobody would ever have to find out the man who wasn't here was also the man who was broke. That's what he understood at the end. That's what's on the tape between the lines. He gave you the door, and you tore it up, because walking through the door meant somebody might see.
That was the thing that turned the whole story from cruelty into a shape. The locking out had never been about me at all. It had not been about whether I'd earned a place at the table. My father had handed Russell away to come out of the worst year of his life with his feet under him and nobody the wiser. A private fund, no strings, no fight, off to the side where it would never have cost me a thing or him a scrap of pride to take it quietly. And Russell had looked at that open door and looked at what it would cost to walk through it, which was only the words, "I need help," said where his wife's family could hear, and he had decided he would rather burn the whole house down around his brother than let one person see him reach for a hand. He'd thrown me off the porch to keep them all looking at me instead of at him. Russell did not say anything to that. There was nothing in the will, nothing on the tape, nothing on the page in his father's own writing that he could argue with, because every one of them was his father, and you cannot cross-examine a dead man's handwriting when his voice just finished agreeing with it. He looked at the page. He looked at the room looking at him. Claire had taken her hands out of her lap and put them flat on the table, and she was not looking at Russell. She was looking at nothing. It was Dana who broke it, and not the way you'd think. She didn't accuse him. She just said the small, true thing from over by the counter, in a voice that hadn't decided to be loud and got loud anyway.
You told me at the grave he was a vulture. You said it right to my face, Russ. You said Eli only showed up for the last 4 months because he could smell the will. You looked me in the eye and you said that, and I believed you, and I went home, and I told my own mother that Eli wasn't worth a card at Christmas. She stopped. He was here every night. It's on the tape, you weren't. That's on the tape, too.
Dana.
Don't. I'm not done being angry at myself yet. I haven't got room to start in on you.
And that was the room turning. Not all at once, nothing sweeping about it, just one chair at a time. Uncle Ray got up and walked the length of the table and stopped in front of me by the doorway and put his hand out, and I shook it, because what else do you do? And he said he was sorry, low, just to me, and I said okay, because there wasn't anything else true to say. The cousin by the window came over, then 2 more. Marlene last of all, and she didn't come all the way over. She stopped a few feet off, and she said the only thing she said the whole night.
I had my hand on the wrong shoulder, at the grave. I want you to know I know that now.
I told her I knew, because I did. I'd watched her hand come off him the second my father's voice named who'd been in the chair, and a hand knows before the rest of a person catches up. Russell stood, finally, because the room had emptied out around him until standing was the only thing left that looked like a decision instead of a defeat. Nobody moved to stop him. Whitfield slid the will and the statement and the folder and the letter into a stack and squared them with 2 fingers, and he said the one thing that closed it without any heat, which was the worst way he could have said it.
The will's in effect, Russell. It's been in effect. This is Eli's house, and it was Eli's house the night you changed the locks, which means a locksmith you hired broke into a house that wasn't yours to lock. I'm not going to do anything with that. Eli's not either, I'd bet, but you should know it's true, the same way the rest of it's true. The fund's still there. It's still yours. Walt set it up so it couldn't be taken back, not even by you walking out of here. When you're ready to say the words, you know where my office is.
Russell looked at me then, the first time he'd looked straight at me all night. I thought he might say something. He didn't. He went out the back, through the kitchen door, across the yard, and he stopped on the porch and he picked up the box. The box with my name taped on the side. The one he'd set out for me to find 2 weeks ago. He carried his own box of my things off the porch he'd thrown me off of, because it was the only thing on that porch that was his to carry. And he put it in his trunk and he drove down the hill, and I have not spoken to him since. That part hasn't changed, and I don't expect it to. Dad left Russell a clean way out, and Russell tore it up to throw me off the porch. I left that fund for him anyway, exactly the way Dad wanted. Would you have left it or taken it back? I left it. I want to be plain about that because it's the part people argue with me over. I never touched the fund. It sits where my father put it, with Russell's name on it, no strings, exactly the way he wrote it, and the day Russell decides he can say 2 words out loud in a lawyer's office, it'll be there, and it'll be there whole. Not because I forgave him. I haven't. And I'm not going to pretend the kind of warm thing where the brother comes back at Christmas and we all decide the past was a misunderstanding. There's no dinner with Russell in my future. But the money was never mine to keep him from, and taking it back would have made me the thing he'd spent 2 weeks telling everybody I was. So I let it sit. It cost me nothing to let a dead man's kindness stay where he left it. The room emptied slow. People do, after a thing like that. They stand in the driveway and talk in low voices, and nobody wants to be the first car to pull out, and then somebody is, and then they all are. Whitfield was one of the last. He put his coat on by the door, under the empty hook, and he stood there a second looking at the hook and then at me.
He picked the table on purpose, you know. He could have had me do this in my office, in chairs, the proper way. He wanted it here. He said, and I'm telling you because he'd want you to have it. He said, do it at the kitchen table. Eli got thrown out of that kitchen. Put him back in it before you put anybody else anywhere.
I didn't have anything to say to that. Whitfield wasn't waiting for me to. He'd been my father's friend for 30-some years, and he'd carried this for him for a season, and now he'd set it down, and a man like that doesn't need you to thank him for keeping a promise. He needs you to let him go home tired. He shook my hand, and he told me to come by the office when I was ready to do the paperwork on the house, and there was no hurry. And then he was gone, and it was just me and Dana in a kitchen full of cold coffee cups. Dana had stayed. She'd cleared the cups without being asked, the way you do in a house where you've decided to be useful because you can't think how else to be sorry. She set the last one in the sink and dried her hands and stood there a second, and then she went to her coat on the back of a chair and took something out of the pocket, and she held it out to me on her flat palm. It was a key ring. My father's. The brass tag worn smooth, the leather fob he'd carried since before I was born, the little bottle opener he'd never once thrown away even after they started putting twist caps on everything. The keys to this house. The old keys, the ones that had fit the old locks, the locks Russell had changed.
He gave me these to hold the spring he got sick. Before any of this, he said somebody steady ought to have a spare set that wasn't in the house in case. I forgot I even had them till tonight. She pressed them into my hand and closed my fingers over them. Russell changed the front lock. I know. But you're going to put the old one back, aren't you? So these'll fit again.
How'd you know I'd put the old lock back?
Because you're the kind of person who keeps the old lock. I should have known that 2 weeks ago. I knew it about you when we were kids, and I let a man at a grave tell me I didn't.
There was no plea in it. She didn't reach for forgiveness, and she didn't try to tell me some part of her had always doubted Russell at the grave. She named the thing she'd believed and the harm it had done and stopped there, owning it bare, and that is the one apology I've ever trusted. The kind with no soft landing built into it for the one apologizing. And then she did the thing that mattered more than the keys. She didn't leave. She filled the kettle, the dented one that had been on that stove since I was a boy, and she put it on the burner Russell had told me to be gone before anyone lit, and she got 2 cups down from the shelf, and she made tea in the kitchen I'd been thrown out of, and the 2 of us sat at the table where 2 weeks ago I'd been handed my coat, and where an hour ago my father's voice had filled the room, and we drank it, and we didn't talk much, and we didn't need to. 4 months in a hospital chair, and then 2 weeks in a motel, and then a kitchen with the lights on, and a cup of tea poured by somebody who'd come back. I'm not going to pretend the cup of tea fixed 4 months. It didn't. But it was the first thing in a long time that didn't cost me anything to accept, and I drank it slow. I'd sat in that chair, the one Dana put the cup in front of, 10,000 times. It's the chair on the corner of the table nearest the porch door, the one you take if you want to be the first one up to start the coffee, which in this house had been my father's chair for as long as he could stand at a stove, and then mine for 4 months while he couldn't. Russell had sat me in it 2 weeks ago, only long enough to hand me my coat. He'd done that on purpose too, I think, though I'll never know it the way I knew the lock. He'd put me in the chair that meant something, and then walked me out of it, so that the thing he was doing would land in the one spot in the house I'd feel it. He was always good at that. He knew where the soft places were. He'd just never once used the knowing to be kind. And now I was back in the chair, with a cup in front of me, and the man who'd built that whole cruelty was driving down a hill with a cardboard box in his trunk, and the kitchen was warm, and the kettle ticked as it cooled the way it always ticked, and I let all of it be ordinary, because ordinary was the thing he'd tried hardest to take. After Dana left, I didn't go to bed. I went out to the toolbox in the mudroom, the one that had been my father's, and I found the old front lock cylinder in the coffee can where he kept the things he was too sensible to throw away, because of course he'd kept it. The man kept everything that had ever fit a door of his. And I took Russell's new deadbolt off the front door in the dark, by the porch light, with my father's own screwdriver, and I put the old one back, the one his keys had always fit, and when I slid the key in, it caught the way it used to catch, with that one half-stick on the second pin you had to know to lift through. I'd known it my whole life. The key turned. The bolt went home. The house was the house again, and my key fitted again, and so would the spare on the brass fob, and so would the set my father carried, because they were all cut for the same old lock, the one Russell had never been able to make me not have. The hook by the door held his keys for 30 years. It is holding them again tonight. I set the rocker where it always faced, and I sat down at the hour we always sat. Let me tell you about the hook, because it's small and it's the whole thing. It's a black iron hook screwed into the door frame by the porch, and for 30 years my father hung his keys on it the second he came in, every time, a sound I could hear from anywhere in the house, the little jingle and tap of a man home for the night. The night of the burial that hook had been empty, and I'd stood outside on the porch with a key that no longer fit a lock, and looked at that empty hook through the glass and understood, more than from anything Russell had said at the grave, that I'd been taken off the house the way you take a coat off a hook. I'd thought about that hook in the motel. The empty hook had been the whole feeling of the thing, more than the box, more than the changed lock. So before I sat down, I hung my father's keys back on it. The brass tag, the worn fob, the bottle opener, all of it, on the hook by the door where they'd hung for 30 years, where the jingle and tap had meant somebody was home. They made the same sound going up. I stood there and listened to it, the small jingle and the tap of brass against the door frame, and I left them there, where they belong, where anybody in this family who wants to come up that porch and into that kitchen can find a key on the hook the way they always could, back before a man decided a lock was a way to make a brother disappear. Then I went and got the wicker rocker. It had been turned to face the wall. That was the part nobody had touched in 2 weeks, the part that had nothing to do with locks or lawyers, just a chair somebody had spun around so it faced plaster instead of the yard, the way you turn a thing you don't want to look at. My father's chair, the one I'd pushed his wheelchair up beside every afternoon at 4 so he could sit in the real one for a half hour, with the light coming across the grass. I turned it back around. I carried it out onto the porch, and I set it where it had always sat, angled toward the west fence the way he liked it, so the last of the sun came in low and gold across the boards, and I put it in the exact spot, the spot worn pale in the porch paint from 30 years of a chair sitting there. And then I did the last thing, which is the thing this whole story was always walking toward, though I didn't know it in the motel, and I didn't know it in the kitchen, and I only really knew it when the chair was back in its spot. I set a second chair next to it, my chair, the one I'd dragged out there every afternoon for 4 months, and I sat down in it at 4 o'clock the next day, at the hour we always sat, with his empty rocker beside me facing the same west fence, and the light came across the yard the way it always came, and I let it. I sat with the rocker beside me until the light went off the boards, and the yard went gray, and then blue, and I did not rock it, and I did not touch it, because it wasn't a chair to be touched. It was a chair to be sat next to. That was the shape of the 4 months, too, if I'm honest, more than the cleaning and the pillow and the wheelchair. Most of it was just sitting next to. A man at the end doesn't need talk, and he doesn't need fixing. He needs somebody in the next chair who isn't waiting for him to be done. I'd given him that. It hadn't felt like a thing at the time. It had felt like the least you could do, which is exactly why Russell could stand at a grave and call it waiting around for a cut. Because to a man who was 3 states away running from his creditors, sitting next to somebody for 4 months with nothing to gain looks like a man with an angle, since he can't picture doing it without one. That was the whole gap between us, said plainer than any tape said it. He couldn't imagine staying for no reason but the staying. I couldn't imagine leaving. The keys that got changed to lock me out are hanging on the hook that holds the door open for everybody now. The chair that got turned to the wall is facing the yard again. That's the whole flip of it, and I'm not going to say a word over it, the way I didn't say a word over him, because the chair and the hook say it and I'd only make it smaller. People ask me, the few who know the whole thing, whether it was worth 4 months in a chair and 2 weeks in a motel to end up sitting on a porch by myself next to a chair with nobody in it. And I tell them the porch isn't empty. The keys are on the hook, which means the door's open, which means the family comes up these steps now the way they used to before a lock got in the way. Dana on Sundays, Uncle Ray once he worked up the nerve, the cousins with their kids, who run straight through to the kitchen and don't know there was ever a tape or a box or a changed lock, and I'd like to keep it that way. Let them think the porch is just a porch. And every afternoon at 4 I push my own chair out beside his, and I sit there while the light crosses the yard and the rocker's empty. And that's all right. A man gets to keep the chair. The hour was always ours, and it's still ours. Him gone and me in the chair next to his, and the keys on the hook by the door catching the last of the light. There's one thing I haven't told you, and I've been holding it because I didn't know where it went until tonight, sitting out here with his keys back on the hook. When I lifted that old lock cylinder out of the coffee can to put it back on the door, there was a folded square of paper in the can under it, gone soft at the creases, my father's writing on the outside, one word, my name, and I haven't opened it yet. It's been in the can long enough to go soft, which means it's been there since before he got sick, which means he put it there for the day I'd come looking for the old lock, knowing I'd be the one who'd put the old one back, the way Dana knew, the way he must have known when he hung the spare on a brass fob and handed it to the steady cousin in case. He knew which son would come looking for the lock. He left a paper in the can for the one who would. I'm going to open it out here, in his chair's company, at 4 o'clock, with the keys on the hook. But not in front of you. Some things a son reads alone on a porch before he tells anybody else what they say. Until next time.